Happy Wine Wednesday.
Happy Wine Wednesday. How are you doing, Mira Boucher?
Pretty great. How are you, Carl Boucher?
Oh, living the dream. Living the dream. It's Muscedere week. This is the Lake Erie North Shore appellation for the first time shining through Carl's Wine Club across the country. We are thrilled to showcase these absolute beauties of wines that, to be honest, I have never experienced that kind of lineup before. I never thought that wines can be as ripened, as rich, as dense. And like I thought big reds were from the south of the Okanagan, to be honest. Like to me, Osoyoos, Oliver, the Golden Miles, the Black Sage Bench, Osoyoos, that's where you got the big reds, right? Maybe a little bit from the 4 Mile Creek, the 4 Mile Creek appellation, but not at that extent. So we found Muscedere Vineyards, and here we are this week. It is so exciting. What do you think?
It's great. And we have to tell our listeners, this is a special Wine Wednesday. This is the first one we've ever done where we're going to premiere our little interview for you guys after it's live. You know why? Because we are in Quebec right now, just for a flash trip. Yeah.
We're probably walking the old Quebec City with the kids at the moment that it's going live. So
yeah.
having
happy spring break.
Happy spring break, having a dinner with old friends, old hockey friends from the 90s and late 80s. So yeah, very special time this week with the family and old friends. So we have the privilege, the pleasure to chat with Melissa Muscedere, one of the multiple Muscedere family members who are running the operation in the vineyard in the Lake Erie North Shore appellation. So yeah.
Yeah. So here comes Melissa.
Here she comes. Woohoo!
Hey, everyone.
Hey,
Melissa.
Yes.
How's it going?
Very good. It's, you know what, we're getting I would like to say we're getting an early spring here, but I mean, March is a crazy month. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. We might get snow next week for all I know. But right now, the sun is shining. Our ground's actually dried up. So we'll see. The snow's all melted. So that's a nice positive.
And you know what? That's so funny. We were we're from the Okanagan, right? So we left Kelowna. There's no snow. We got here. We're in center Quebec right now, like right dead center in Victoriaville, and the kids just went to dig a tunnel in the snowbank. Like just got me back to early January, for God's sake.
Well, it's funny too. Well, pre-COVID, my niece had a hockey tournament in Quebec during Bonhomme Carnival. So it was in February. And we left here and we were under a state of emergency from 1 inch to 2 of snow. And I land in Quebec City and the snow is towering over the houses. And I'm like, oh, snow emergency. And he's like, oh yeah, we don't close anything here. Our snow. I'm like, oh, okay.
You know what, Melissa? I'm from 3 hours north of Quebec City. My hometown is Chicoutimi. It's like, yeah, that's the country of the snow. That's where like snowbanks getting higher than the roof by Christmas.
That's so crazy.
But that hockey tournament, Melissa, in 1991, I went to that hockey tournament and we won. It's the international Quebec Pee Wee tournament, right?
Yeah, it's the Pee Wee tournament. So my niece plays Little Caesar, so she plays hockey in Detroit. So they went to the tournament. It was 2019, I think we went. So it was the year before COVID hit. That we were
so we beat Switzerland back in 1991 to be the only North American team to win that year. So that's awesome, Melissa. So now talking about your niece, let's talk about a family affair, okay? Because I love your story. We love showcasing to our members family vineyard. So I'm just dying to hear the story of the Muscedere family. Where's the roots? Where you guys are from? And how did you end up in Canada? Maybe not you, but your parents. And how came the decision to start a vineyard and go forward with it, the family all together?
Okay. So talks of a winery actually started in the late 1990s. So I have two older brothers. I won't disclose our age difference because they are never happy with me when I do. So I have two older brothers, and they basically started discussing business options in the late 1990s. So they were throwing ideas back and forth. And one thing that was happening in the late 1990s is vineyards were really starting to pop up here in the Lake Erie North Shore region. So when we planted, the only two major ones that people knew of were going to be Peely and Colio, which are also two of the largest in Ontario. So they were throwing back and forth ideas. Our family, so our parents came from Italy. So our family is Italian. Our parents came from Italy back in 1970. And they essentially came to Canada because our dad wanted to avoid his year of doing military. So they moved to Canada in 1970. But my mom, as an only child, her parents refused to move to Canada. So her parents didn't like the language barrier. So her parents stayed in Italy. So every other summer, we would fly back to Italy and we would spend the summer with our grandparents. And our Nono managed vineyards his whole life in Italy. So we would go to Italy in the summer, and I mean, you would see kind of the vineyard aspect. So when that was coming about, my brother said, you know what? We have this land in Essex County. Our dad was retiring at the same time. So our dad was retiring from 30 years of working in the automotive plant. So we planted our first 5 acres. So in Ontario, in order to get a license to sell wine, we need to have at least 5 acres of grapes in the ground. So late 1990s, early 2000s, we tested the land that we have. So the funniest part is when my mom called her father and told her, oh, we're going to plant grapes in Ontario. His choice words were, are you people crazy? Because when you think of Lake Erie North Shore, so it's funny, if I turned around and I showed you guys outside right now, we have completely flat ground. So we have the polar opposite of what he's used to in Italy.
And where about in Italy? Because I traveled Italy quite a while for the wine business. So where about in Italy? Isn't it
so
from Veneto?
We're an hour south of Frosinone. So we're just we're between Rome and Naples. So he's in Lazio. So actually now there's a bunch of wineries kind of popping up in that region. And one of their biggest things is they go with their Atina Cabernet. So he was like, you people are crazy. You, first of all, have flat ground. And second of all, you have winter. This was a culture shock to him. But we tested our ground. Everything came back really well. So in 2002, 2003, we planted our first 5 acres. And we were also the first ones in the area to put up our wind machine directly in the center of our vineyard. And the reason we put up that wind machine directly in the center of our vineyard is because geographically, if we were looking at a map right now, we are bordering Lake Erie right at the southern point of Ontario, but we're actually the furthest off the lake. So since we're the furthest off the lake, it does a couple things for us. Usually our bud break happen sooner, so we are a little bit warmer. So we do have a little bit more of the growing degree days just because of our distance from the lake. And then the other thing is it does make us a little bit colder in the winter, but what we've noticed through cold winters on the lake, off the lake, since Lake Erie is so so shallow, it doesn't really matter at this point. But what the wind machine really helps us with is if we have that early bud break, and then we have a late frost, essentially what we'll do is we'll wake up, we'll kick on that wind machine, and what it'll do is you'll notice the frost will actually not settle within the area that wind machine covers. So we put in that wind machine. What we learned from our first 5 acres is our Toledo clay that we have here. Once you get over the fact that it breaks almost every piece of machinery that we put into it, it grows reds really, really well. So what we did in 2006 is we focused on 7 acres of reds. So that's where we planted our Syrah, our Merlot, and our Cabernet Sauvignon. So for those of you that have been here, or for those of you that have seen us, we are very small. So we do between 2,000 and 3,000 cases a year, and we sell everything straight out of this retail store. So if you come into our retail store, number one, when you pull in, it looks like you're pulling into someone's house. So our parents actually built this house in 2004. And when this house was built, the plan was never to turn any part of the house into the winery. The plan was always that when we open the winery, we would build in the directly in the center of the vineyard. But what economically essentially made the most sense is what you notice here is this is our back patio. So our basement is actually a walkout to the back patio. So the basement level of the house was turned into our retail area. Underneath our garage was never filled in because our mother wanted to keep it as her fruit cellar because she wanted to hang her prosciutto and her sausages. But my brothers had a way different plan for her. They blew out a wall and we turned that into half of our barrel cellar. And what is now our 2-car garage that we park cars in used to be our entire production area. So essentially we started off really small and we kind of built on piece by piece. So when people come here, you'll always find at least one of us, generally between me, my brothers, my parents are usually here. My dad's usually hiding in the vineyard. And now I know you have a family picture here somewhere, but it's funny because I was looking at this picture and these little kids that you see here, the furthest one on the left is my nephew, Luca. And he was, oh my gosh, how old was he in this picture? This picture is at least 10 years ago. He might've been 7 or 8. And he actually starts university next year. So you can see any of these kids here. And my youngest nephew, Ethan, he's going to be 11 in April. And he actually comes and he'll spend his 2 hours. He'll go in the vineyard with my parents. He'll help my parents. In the summer when we have our patio open and we're doing the wood-fired pizza, all the kids have basically learned how to make pizza with my mom. So even the customers that come here, everybody calls our mom Nona now, because that's how they know her.
I love it. Tell me that she's still doing the prosciutto, though. Tell me that she's still doing the prosciutto.
You know what? She didn't do it this year. She's just like, it's easier to just buy it at the store.
Yeah.
Too much work. And my brothers, we've taken over. Honestly, it's funny. We've taken over every square inch that we possibly can. That when we have. When they come and do our LCDO audits here in Ontario, the guy that always comes and does our audits always tells me that I have the best use of space of the wineries he's ever been to, because it's like, oh, look, we have a square inch that you have to crawl to get into. We'll use it for something.
Yeah.
So you know what? So we've made it work. The vineyard is growing well. I would say the reds grow a little bit better than the whites, because essentially what happens is everything that works for reds sucks for whites. Everything that works for whites works counterintuitive for the reds. But I would say for the most part, our passion is in growing reds. So we want to do the big, bold reds. And being where we are, so if we were looking at a map right now, essentially we are on the most southern coast of Ontario. So Ontario is kind of split up into 3 major DVAs. So you have the Niagara, like the Niagara area that everybody knows. Then you'll have Prince Edward County, that's north of Niagara, right between Toronto and Ottawa. You guys are actually very close to Prince Edward County right now. And then right on the southern cusp of Ontario, so right on the southern part between Windsor and I would say Point Pelee here. So we're right on the border of Detroit. That's where you're going to find us, right in that southern quarter. So we will start budding usually, depending on the season, end of April, beginning of May. So they are just finishing up our winter pruning right now. And then we will start tying down our vines. And then essentially we wait for our season to start. So usually we'll bud before Mother's Day. generally, but depending, like last year was a cooler year, so we budded later. But generally by at least Mother's Day, we've already had bud breaks. So that's why our wind machine is even more important, because usually that Mother's Day weekend, we get frost. So we'll kick on our wind machine, and it helps us not to get that bud loss at that point.
That's amazing. I love these family stories, Melissa. I have goosebumps right now. It's just amazing. Yeah, it means so much, I think, for Canadian now, more and more, and especially since the pandemic. I think people are turning into like support local, but also support the smaller businesses. And then you think 2 to 3,000 cases. Listen, like I was reading your tasting notes before I taste all of the wine. I said like 140 cases produced, 165. Oh, wait a minute, 40 cases. Oh, wait a minute, 40 cases. Yeah, right. I love that. I taste these wines and I feel privileged to have some to taste. So, and for me, what stood out, and you mentioned it a couple times. Listen, that's the quality of the red. I knew from a couple times I'm tasting some of the Formal Creek appellation. There's some big and bold red, but across from Syrah, Meritage, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, all of them are all brought to perfect ripeness. There's no green aspect in any of these wines. It's dense, it's rich, it's complex. Oh, I fell in love with that red portfolio. None of these wines, like I give them all 92 plus, 92 points or more. Like, and especially for me, the Syrah. I had I search for great Syrahs all over the country all the time, and Ontario is hard to find that wonderful Syrah. And I found it with yours. It was my number 3 Syrah on my Syrah days. And I tasted 35 Canadian Syrah that day. It was number 3. So yeah, the portfolio is absolutely spectacular. I want to know a little bit more here. What's the brothers? What's your brothers are? What's their function? Who's the winemaker? Who's the vineyard manager? Or dad does your dad does the vineyard manager? Who does what in there? Or everyone does everything?
We all wear a lot of hats. So we all basically everybody does everything that needs to get done. So our dad, you will generally find him driving around in the tractor. My middle of my 2 brothers, he does a lot of the vineyard management, and he does the majority of the winemaking. And then my other brother will do a lot of the sales. And I do basically, depends on the day, just about everything. Really depends on the day. You could find me filling barrels, you could find me selling wine, you could find me in the vineyard,
or doing direct to consumer with wine clubs across the country.
You could find me basically doing just about anything. So as I said, we're very small, so we do wear a lot of hats in that. But you know what? We essentially get everything that needs to be done. So it works. It works.
You know, before I let you go, there's one thing that I absolutely need to touch base with. It's Nebbiolo and Barbera. Okay, yes. This is not it's not usual. We're in Canada. Okay, no. Piemonte, it's far away. Yeah. So how the idea came up, I need a little overview here, because, well, for people who don't know what I'm talking about here, it's Muscedere are growing Nebbiolo and Barbera. So they have 2 very special wines in their portfolio. It's 100% Nebbiolo. I tasted, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first expression, the first bottling of the Nebbiolo, the 2017 vintage, and also the Barbera Cabernet Sauvignon. That, by the way, I think that the idea of blending these 2 grapes are a masterful job of matching different perspective in grapes and making that together. Anyway, I really enjoy that. Mm-hmm. So please tell me a little bit more. How has that started? It's absolute craziness to me But after what I said, it works. So
well, as I said, since we started, our Nono told us we were absolutely crazy. So I mean, it kind of adds up to it, right? One thing that you did say earlier, before I talk about the Nebbiolo and the Barbera, was the Syrah. So we have tried pushing the envelope with a lot of our reds. And the reason you don't find Syrah in a lot of, especially Ontario wineries, is I always call Syrah, when I explain Syrah at the winery, I'll always call Syrah our problem child. And the reason I call Syrah our problem child is because Syrah starts to die, the buds will start to die at minus 17 degrees Celsius, which is a very normal temperature that we do see here in Lake Erie North Shore in the dead of winter. So with that said, our wind machine really, really helps us with this variety. And it's generally the reason that we'll have to turn on that wind machine directly in the center of our vineyard.
That's the wind machine. There you go. We can see it now.
That's exactly what it is. Do they use those in BC or no?
Yeah, there's not a lot. There's a few, but not a lot, to be honest.
So here they're very, very prevalent. If you're in Lake Erie North Shore, if you're in Niagara, if you're in Prince Edward County, they're very, 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 very prevalent. So the Syrah is generally the reason that we have to turn on our wind machine in the dead of winter, because essentially it works with your inversion layer. Heat rises. When heat rises, what it'll do is it'll bring the heat down and it'll change our ambient temperature at our bud level. So our first one was Syrah. And then what happened is my brothers were discussing what varieties can we plant that would go back to our Italian heritage that we could grow here in Essex County. And Barbera and Nebbiolo came up because we had the growing season that we would need to essentially ripen those. So we did plant those in 2008. Our first production off of those should have been in 2014. But for all of you that are not in Ontario, 2014 and 2015 were two absolute nightmares of growing seasons. We go back to the word polar vortex. And we were bordering about minus 24, minus 25 degrees Celsius for about 3 weeks. So we didn't have any buds in our vineyard. So essentially, what happens is all of our vines regrew from the bottom. So what you would notice if you're in our vineyard right now, we don't have some of the massive trunks that you see when you're in France or in Italy, because some of our trunks are very new. So with that said, being out a crop in 14 and 15, our first production and our first vintage release on the Nebbiolo and Barbera came from a 2017 vintage. And those ones were very low, our first run at producing those. So we did 40 cases of each of them. So we did 40 cases of the straight Nebbiolo, and then we did 40 cases of the Barbera Cab Sauv. So for those of you that don't know those varieties, especially when you look at Barbera, Barbera is generally a very, very high acid grape. So since it's a higher
sour cherry in a nutshell, right?
High acidity. So what we did is by blending in the 40% of the Cabernet Sauvignon, we were able to balance off the acidity, and we were able to give it a little bit more of the tannin structure. The funny thing that came in with the Barbera and the Nebbiolo was that so many people don't actually produce them here in Ontario, that last year when I was going to do our VQA, so VQA is our Vintners Quality Alliance here in Ontario, and I was submitting those wines to VQA, they sent me back an email because I was having them just preliminary look at the labels, and they're like, Melissa, like, the Nebbiolo is eligible for VQA Lake Erie North Shore, but the Barbera isn't. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not eligible? They're like, oh, it's not on the list of eligible grapes. Are you sure it's not Barbaresco? I'm like, no, it's straight Barbera. So nobody's ever had it planted. So since no one's ever had it planted, no one's applied to get it put on the list for VQA. So what you'll notice is the Nebbiolo will say VQA Lake Erie North Shore. whereas the Barbera won't, but they were both planted here. They're almost planted directly under our wind machine. And these usually are two of our last varieties that we will harvest in the fall. So Cabernet Sauvignon goes first, and then the Barbera and the Nebbiolo are usually done first week of November. So they're the last ones that'll come off the vine.
You guys are pioneer. You guys are pioneer. This is fantastic. Now I greatly enjoy, especially with the Barbera Cabernet, like after a 2 hour of decanting, that's where like it went from like, I'm not sure. And we left it there after dinner. And at one point, Mira said, Carl, come here, come here. I thought one of the child fell it somewhere and smashed his head or something. Yeah. And no, she's like, taste this. I was like, I know it would be, and like it was completely different wine. It just like woke up and it break like that. The load of complexity that the Cabernet bring with the Barbera to me was like a Black Forest cake, where like at the end when you get the jam, and they're like, wow, okay, and that cherry in the piece of cake, you're like, that's the part that I was looking for. So yeah, absolutely amazing. So Melissa, if you give me like a short 1 minute and a half, I would like to give our people a little rundown of the 8 wines that we have in the pack, and quickly, because I think it's one of the first time that we do a pack plus 2 bonus pick where there's no wine under 90 points, none whatsoever. In the red, there's none under 92 points. These scores are absolutely phenomenal. So Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, both in the white. They're in a lighter style, but I absolutely love what the Sauvignon Blanc has to offer. It's pure, it's clean, it's a 90 plus, just on the verge of 91, but a pure expression of Sauvignon Blanc. I love the length, and I also like the finish of it. It kind of linger longer than I was expected. It doesn't have that uber high acidity at the beginning, who's like turn it austere. No, it's very inviting. So Sauvignon Blanc was a big hit, especially for Mira. Sauvignon Blanc is turning out into her favorite white lately, and she was really in love. She kind of gave me crap that I didn't rate it that high enough. She said, you should have given her a 92 minimum.
I like so,
and also we have the Riesling, also 2020 vintage, the glorious 2020 vintage. So Riesling is a lighter style, but to me that's the perfect summer Riesling because it's quaffable. You don't have the lime attack at the beginning. It's really round. There's no like uber sweetness that it turns out heavy. No, it's bright, fresh, and clean. So this is a little bit for the white, turning into the red. The first one that I tasted of all was the Meritage, the 2017 Meritage, and it's one of our members who's from Windsor, Mike Laplante, the average wine enthusiast. He actually sent us a bottle by mail, saying, Carl, you need to taste that. And it kind of sat there for many months. And at some point I said, Mira, we need to open that bottle. And boom, my eyes went big like that. Mira's like, oh my God, it seems like you have something interesting here. And yes, that's how I was convinced that the reds are in a perfect ripening situation down there. And I paid more attention of what you guys do. So Meritage was my first one, and I like the way it's blended. It's coming together now. The oak is so well integrated. There's these multiple cedar, tobacco, cocoa, all of these like intermediate flavors are really shining, and also some cassis. So well done, 92 points. Moving to the Cab Franc, and I noted in my notes, this is the leader right now. It's in the lead for the best value wine of the year. Under $20 for $19. I can't see how you can find a better Cab Franc at that price. It's rich. There's length. There's spice. There's that dark chocolate that's always light me up. So yeah, I love. For the price, to me, it's mind-boggling. how you guys like make that happen at that price point. It's an absolute hit for me. Moving on to the Cab Sauv. That's funny. I took your Cab Sauv to a wine event, a BC wine event this year, and I blind tasted like even the former owner of Black Hills Estate. They were drinking Nota Bene, and I brought them a glass of your Cabernet, and it's like, what? This is it's a Soyuz. It's like a what? And it's like, no. Finally, yeah. So I said, no, it's Lake Erie North Shore appellation. And they were like, what? So 92-point Cab Sauv. It shows the world, not only the Canadian, it shows the world what we can do with Cab Sauv. It's too many times no one will believe that we can write Cabernet Sauvignon properly. And you, here, see here, you got the answer. This is fantastic. And I believe that 2018 was not necessarily the hottest the vintage, right? And it's
2018 wasn't a very hot vintage. 2018 was a little bit of a cooler winter. So since it was a little bit of a colder winter, we had our natural selection in the vineyard. So we had a little bit of bud damage. But you know what? We're cropping very low. So since we're cropping low, when you're going to 2.5 tons per acre, even in a not ideal year like 2020, yes, the pandemic came, yes, everything was awful, but our vineyard was fantastic. When you're cropping low enough, you can make really good wines in really mediocre years, and that's what you're trying to do. So
yeah, and you know what? Like I always mention, if you did not make good wines with the 2020 vintage, you better find something else to do. Because we give you everything you needed, right? So that's how we found like the great ones. That's the one who produced fantastic wines and challenge and vintage. You got it with the 2018 Cab Sauv 92 plus, and just finishing with the Syrah. Again, it was the biggest surprise of my Syrah day. I give it a 94 points. To me, it took me to the Northern Rhone. In the sense because it's more finesse, it's complexity. There's enough fruit to please the big full body type of wine drinker, but complexity and finesse to me was just screaming. The nose was so intriguing for when you taste so many BC Syrahs, and often they're more on the heavy fruit. This was just like absolutely teleporting me to the Northern Rhone with that kind of like more of smoked meat, blueberry, spice like cloves. It was like such an amazing Syrah in the Lang. So 94 points Syrah. That's the discovery pack that we have this week. Melissa, thank you so much for including us in what you do. Like I mentioned, I feel privileged to have discovered what you guys are doing, and hopefully Canadian from all over the country will take a stab at that, because it's worth discovering.
This is one of their first opportunities. So generally we just essentially sell across Ontario. So it's a lot of people in other provinces haven't been able to have our wines unless they physically come to our winery. So
here we are. So fun, like a Canadian premiere here between the Muscedere family and Carl's Wine Club. So Melissa, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Great. We've so enjoyed discovering your wines. So thank you. We'll see you soon, Melissa.
We'll chat with you later, Melissa. You are a rock star. Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo! I love these family stories, Mira. I have like goosebumps. I love it. My favorite part.
Yeah.
After tasting the wines.
We're going to Ontario in June for our first ever members party out in Niagara, June 24th. You guys all invited. And I know some members have already booked their flights, booked their accommodations. June 24th is going to be epic. And we're looking at adding in a little bit of a Carl's Wine Club tour the day before. But I think we need to go back ASAP and plan some more time so we can go visit Melissa and the Muscederes.
Essex County.
And Nana. We'll meet Nana
Yeah.
at the
I need to meet Nana. I need to have her prosciutto recipe. How the heck she does that? I need to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mira. So this is our abbreviated, recorded version of Wine Wednesday. We are traveling right now, but we wanted you to meet Melissa because, yeah, here's the family story. Here's the Muscedere family story. And for the first time ever, these wines are available outside of Ontario until Thursday. Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Cab Franc Meritage, Cab Sauv, Syrah, and believe it or not, Nebbiolo and Barbera. I kid not. I'm not. Yeah. Absolutely
He's
amazing.
Speechless is what he is. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's just exactly what we've been saying, Carl, is that Canadian wines are just getting to such a world-class level. There's so much innovation coming out of Canada in terms of wine, and it's so exciting to discover it with you guys. So thanks for being a part of it.
Canadian wine lovers, Carl's Wine Club members, and Mira Boucher.
Carl Boucher.
We wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in. We'll chat with you later. Cheers.
Cheers.